Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Optimizing Your Marketing Mix During Unprecedented Times. We know you have a lot of things that you could be doing with your time, so we truly appreciate that you're spending it with us here. My name's Katie, and I'll be moderating today's event. And before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. So first of all, this webinar will be recorded and you'll get an email with the recording afterwards. And all attendees are muted, but if you have questions, please put them into the chat box or the Q&A box and we'll get those questions answered live at the end of the webinar. And just to reiterate, you will get an email with the recording. All right, so let's get started. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. First, we have Ross Graber. He is a VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester. Ross is passionate about helping B2B marketing organizations create meaningful systems of measurement that accurately reflect marketing's contribution to the business. Ross joined Serious Decisions with more than 15 years of practitioner experience, previously serving as the Director of Marketing for Noble, a SaaS-based provider of technical information for engineering markets. Before Noble, Ross held multiple product and marketing leadership positions and received a BA in English and Sociology from the State University of New York at Albany. And next, we have Bonnie Crater. Bonnie is the president and CEO of Full Circle Insights. She's also a 5-time VP of Marketing at Genesys, Netscape, Oracle, Stratify, and VoiceObjects. While valuing the creative side of marketing, Bonnie's real love is marketing operations, measuring marketing investments, and determining investment optimization. Now, as CEO of Full Circle, Bonnie is working to help fellow marketers get the data needed to succeed. Bonnie holds a BA in biology from Princeton University. All right, remember you can ask all the questions you want in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer those at the end of the webinar. And today on the agenda, we will be starting with Ross, who will be covering effective reporting on marketing tactics, and then we'll hand it over to Bonnie to cover executing with Salesforce reporting, and then we will hop live into questions. With that, I'm going to let Ross take it away. Thanks, Ross.
Great, and thanks a lot, Katie, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. As Katie mentioned, my name's Ross Graber. I'm a VP and Principal Analyst here at Serious Decisions, and I focus my research primarily on marketing performance measurement. So, like many of us, if you would have asked me back in February, I would have given you a slightly different vision for how I'd have been spending my spring, and probably my summer too. There were trips I'd planned, visits with friends. I had a celebration or two mixed in there. But as Robert Burns once wrote, improving foresight may be vain, the best laid schemes of mice and men, which is his way of saying that the world had other things in store. And for most of us, that means we've got to adapt. And adapting means creating new plans. A key input to developing plans, it really requires us to understand what's worked for us in the past. And one of the things that I've observed is that historically, the ways B2B marketers have measured, often those have failed to provide the level of texture and granularity that's really needed to make smart choices as we move forward. So today, I'm going to provide you with what I hope is a new, different, and useful way to start looking at tactic performance. So you can use that to help feed the planning cycles and the replanning cycles that I know so many of my clients are currently engaged in. And I wanted to start out by sharing a grid, a report, a graphic that may start to feel a little bit familiar to a lot of you. Have you seen something like this before? This sort of reporting assumes that every channel we use, it should really be evaluated based on how many qualified leads a channel creates and how well they convert to a successful sale. But this type of view can sometimes feed us some false choices around what's working best. If we zoom in and start looking at something like content syndication, we can see a really low conversion rate. Does that mean we should cut it? Well, I don't think we know enough based on this to start to make those choices, because the questions we really want to answer are things like, Did this tactic work well with some audiences and maybe not as well with others? Or what else was involved when we were successful or unsuccessful? Or how should I make investments in the future? What should I put more of my resources and dollars towards? We've expressed the problem here in a way that's just a little bit too simple to solve with a grid like this. We need a better way to answer that. And in my view, that starts by being able to take a deeper look at tactics. What are tactics really? And we've got a definition for that. We think of tactics as those tools used by marketers to inspire individuals to think, feel, or behave differently at the same time while we're working to further a business objective. Now, you'll notice a couple of key words there. We say individuals, which means it's people that we're trying to get to act. So implicit in the concept of a tactic is an audience. We need to know who our efforts are for. We've also got to understand what it is that we're trying to do. Not all of our tactics are intended to get our audiences to do the same things. There are many different motions that buyers may take over the course of buying. So this is my way of saying, when we consider a tactic, we really have to keep in mind who it's for and what it's for. And I want to illustrate that for you with a little bit of a game. We can look at reporting like this, where we have email and content syndication, and start to ask ourselves, which performed better? We see email got more responsiveness. Maybe that performed better for us. But does our view into this change if we start to segment this or divide this by different audiences? Perhaps we're selling to CIOs and developers as part of a buying group. We can see that some tactics are getting better responsiveness from our CIOs than others. Other tactics might be getting more responsiveness from developers. Different tactics do different things for different types of buyer roles. But I'm not even sure that that's the end of the story, because we may start to see that some tactics are better for helping us to acquire or get the attention of net new individuals, people we haven't worked with before. And that may be fine, but what if our strategy is requiring us to spend more of our time, attention, and really our money on doing a better job at influencing late-stage buyers? I might make different choices about what tactics I'm going to do. This is my way of illustrating that in our assessment of what's working for us, we've got to be able to wrap our heads around who it's for and what it's for, and evaluate tactics upon that basis. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what it is that our tactics are supposed to be accomplishing for us. And often what I'll see is that marketers are going to look toward responses, at least initially, to tell us that something's working. That's the first signal we're getting back from the market that these efforts we've gone through have gotten people's attention. Now, while there are other things that we're going to look at that will put this in greater context, our response is the first thing we see. When I talk about putting this in greater context, though, I'll typically recommend to my clients to understand their demand process by using a demand waterfall, which really is tracking stage to stage progression of demand throughout your process. And throughout that waterfall, there are going to be different objectives that you're trying to accomplish. At the top of your waterfall, maybe what you're trying to do is activate demand, capture the initial attention of an audience. Perhaps it's an audience who hasn't worked with you before. You're going to gear some tactics towards that. Other tactics may be geared toward helping you to validate different buyers or members of a buying group to start to help your organization prioritize that these guys, these people, these women are ready for the time and attention of some of our selling functions. So we're looking to validate demand with some tactics, and other tactics may be geared toward helping us effectively and more quickly move demand to successful closure or acceleration. The point that I really want to illustrate here is that when we see complex buying cycles averaging more than 30 interactions between buyers and sellers, we've got to keep in mind that it's not a single tactic which is successfully creating a sale for us. We've got to take a more nuanced view that allows us to think about our tactics relative to their program objectives. Are we activating demand? Are we validating it? Or are we accelerating it? Every tactic needs to play its part, but as smart and data-driven marketers, we need to be evaluating tactics based on its part. The other thing that I find becomes really critical as we start to make different choices about what tactics we're going to do more of and what we're going to do less of is understanding the components of the tactics themselves. Because we see three elements that really become important when it comes to managing those tactics. We've got to be able to group our tactics based on delivery mechanisms. So the way an idea gets to your audience, by asset type or the container for that idea, and by theme, a categorization that helps us describe really the fundamental aboutness of whatever is being contained in that asset. What are we talking to folks about? And I can illustrate those with just a couple of examples. When we think of delivery mechanisms, we're talking about things like email and banner ad and content syndication. If we're talking about asset types, we're looking at things like those containers of white papers or videos, webinars like this, or value calculators. And themes might be things like cost savings in the cloud or cloud security. They could also be feature or function related themes, but these are the components. And I share these to help really lay out our playing field, which is described in the Serious Decisions Tactic Performance Model. It ensures that we're thinking about the right sets of details as we're evaluating our tactics. Who's it for? What's it for? Plus those dimensions of the tactics that we're going to want to manage as we work to make better and smarter choices about what it is that we're going to do next. So now that I've started with a bit of a framework, I want to see if I can illustrate this by providing a more granular view of how I might use these concepts to actually look at performance. And I'm going to start with what we'll refer to as a program manager view. We're beginning by locking down a couple of those key elements that we talked about, the audience and the intention. So here we'll look at a CIO audience, and we'll look at the intention of acquiring or activating net new demand. And what you'll see here is we've started to lay out delivery mechanisms along the side, asset types across the top, and we're making comparisons here where we can start to see what level of responsiveness are we getting from these different combinations of tactics. And you may go and look at something like content syndication and say, well, here, look at this. It's not getting the same level of responsiveness as perhaps other delivery mechanisms that I'm using. But what I also might be able to say is, well, for analyst reports, it is an effective way to get those types of ideas across. So we're starting to note some of the cases where this works and where it's not working quite as well for us. What we're going to recommend next is that we go and shift the view. We continue looking at delivery mechanisms, but now we start comparing those to themes to make some sort of conclusion to say, are our themes performing equally well for our CIO audience? And here I think we see something which is fairly overwhelming. The examples showing that security of cloud is really resonating with our CIO audience, whereas the cost saving theme, it's not making as much of an impact. One more time, we'll take this equation and we'll shift it. And here we'll look at our theme based on our asset types and draw a new set of conclusions to see what else that we can learn. One of the things that we are seeing is our security theme is continuing to hold up well. So what we're doing is we're using these different views to start to analyze how well tactics are doing with a similar audience and a similar purpose. And we want to go and take these conclusions and start laying them out. And one of the things that we recommend, because this can start to feel difficult to manage, is that as we go through, we create a list of observations and then go back and prioritize them. Those observations may start with something simple like security in the cloud is working for us, or content syndication is working well, but only when it comes to new analysts, to promoting new analyst reports. Whatever it may be, once we can prioritize those, it puts us in a position to build out that list and start recommending actions. So what are those things that we can do, change, or adjust about how we execute going forward to ensure that we're doing things that are more likely to work in the places which have been most important to us in the past? So this was a fairly summarized view, a fairly granular view. And now I want to move on and talk about things that are going to be a little bit more summarized for us, because we will want to start to think about information in a much more aggregated way, especially if we're sitting around the table trying to make broader decisions about how we're going to deploy our resources going forward. And you may be going through this right now if you're starting to recalibrate your marketing plans, or if you're in the second or third rounds of recalibrating your plans based on perhaps some tactics that may no longer be available to you. So consider live events, or perhaps based on different changes in the audiences you're going after, or even your budget situation. So when I talk about coming up with a higher level of summarization, usually we're looking for higher summarization because we're getting ready to present some sort of information to leadership. And it's important to keep in mind what leaders are generally going to be concerned with, because for the most part, we're going to see that our business leaders are concerned with those higher order questions. They have a higher scope of responsibility that typically sits above tactics. The first questions that we're generally looking to ask revolve around how the business is performing and what segments need the greatest level of focus, attention, and resources. We're also looking to identify where perhaps our objectives in those segments are not tracking the way we'd like, where we're falling behind, and potentially where more resources can help get us out of some of that trouble we're experiencing. So what we're laying out here is carrying forward some of those principles that we looked at in the earlier analysis, where we continue to focus on an audience and we continue to make a decision about how we're going to anchor the analysis, meaning, are we going to start by asset types? And in this case, we do. You can see buying group, buying guide, white paper, webinar listed along the left-hand side. And then we start to break out with our bar chart the different intentions of our tactics, so we can get a sense not only for responsiveness, but we can look at responsiveness relative to those different intentions of our tactics. And here we can see things like our events are getting a lot of responses and webinars look pretty good for activation, but white papers are getting us the most responsiveness overall. This is the level of detail that we want to start looking at our performance using. Now, what we're looking at are responses that we would call total responses, which means everything based on what our tactics are generating. But it can be important to pair this by looking at a set of data or a cohort of data that is only looking at scenarios where our business has been successful. And I'll refer to these as our winning responses, because you might start to see that responsiveness when you're winning might have been very different than overall. So the example here is, if we make the comparison between the left-hand side and the right, you can see that our webinars continue to hold up really well for the activation of new CIOs. But in this example, we can also see that while live events may have been very popular overall, they're not carrying forward, and they're not creating situations where we're winning. This is the level of granularity that we're looking for, and we want to carry, again, these types of observations into a list where we're going to build both what we've seen and what we're going to do about it, so we can start to make recommendations around the right plans for moving forward, so we can take what we've learned about how we've performed before and use that to influence how we're going to drive or direct our tactics and our investments in those tactics as we move forward. So, a couple of thoughts as I close up this part of the presentation. It's important to put past performance in the right context. It's one of many inputs that are going into our planning process. It's something that's going to help us use data to know what's worked for us before. As you're doing your assessment, it's important to be precise in grouping tactics together as we assess them. And that grouping should be based on who the tactics are intended for and the roles that tactics are supposed to play in the process. Are they activating, validating, or accelerating for us? Why are we executing them? We're going to want to granularly define our tactics so we can look at them in terms of which delivery mechanisms are working best, which asset types are working best, and which themes are working best for us. And we should absolutely keep in mind that tactics are a means to accomplish our strategy. Strategy needs to take precedence here. So as our businesses adapt and make different choices about which segments are going to be the most worthwhile for us in changing market environments, and which of our buyers are going to need the most attention and most focus and most tender love and care in these situations, that we use, steer, and direct the tactics which have been successful at gaining their attention and moving them forward in their buying processes, that we continue to use those so we can see better results as we move forward. And that's really what's important when it comes to reassessing the tactics in our mix. At this point, I want to thank you for your attention, and I want to hand things back over to Bonnie.
All right. Thank you, Ross. I get really excited when maybe I'm just like a marketing nerd, but I love those slides, and I love talking about this topic. So welcome everybody to our webinar. I get to talk about my favorite topic, which of course is measuring marketing. And measuring marketing is taking a different tack these days, because most of us agree that we're entering a recessionary period in our economy. And so in a recession, it's really important, particularly for marketing, to not waste any money. We can't waste money. So so the question is, how do we know whether we're wasting money or not? How do we create success in a situation where the actual expense of marketing, it's being watched very, very carefully? So many of you, have gone through the situation where, your events have all been canceled, or you're not going to the events that you plan to. So some of that money has been taken away, and some of it's been reallocated. So what's really important is that at this stage is to do the best job you possibly can for measuring marketing. So I'm going to advance my slides here. I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach at Full Circle for how we guide folks to measure marketing. And we invented a few years ago a methodology. We call it the Full Circle method. And I'm also going to introduce a new method that we have for measuring digital marketing. So let's talk a little bit about the Full Circle method. So this is designed to to optimize your activities around measuring marketing. It starts off with an activity that we all do, which is planning. Planning is very important. We typically are planning, everybody plans once a year, but some people are planning multiple times a year. Particularly in our current environment, a lot of us are being asked to replan. So a planning is our planning dashboard. So this is a series of dashboards that live on Salesforce. Our planning dashboard allows you to get information about what's happened in the past so that you can do a reverse waterfall and figure out how many leads you need to generate to meet your sales goals for the coming period, whatever that might be. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's a quarter. The next dashboard is focused on achieving. And the reason that we have the second dashboard on achieving is because when you have planning, or in your planning period, you're going to set goals. So those goals would be addressed in the achieving dashboard, and you want to measure your progress against those goals. So our third dashboard is the one that we call optimizing. So one of the key areas for driving efficiency is really understanding how your lead management process works. So everybody knows that when you hand off leads from marketing to sales, sometimes there can be some variation in follow-up. I guess that's a nice way to say that. What happens is sometimes the salespeople follow up on the leads and sometimes they don't. And knowing exactly what's being followed up on and what's not being followed up on is really, really important, because because in order to get a proper feedback loop, you need to know, okay, this campaign actually drove leads that were just really not useful for the salespeople, or these leads are so hot and they're like closing like crazy. So understanding the follow-up and where the sales team is actually picking and choosing and doing follow-up is really important. Of course, we want them to follow up on every lead, but that doesn't always happen. So understanding how your lead management process works and where the breaks are in the action is really important, because then once you have that understanding, then you can do something about it. The last dashboard is evaluating, and this is the dashboard that's designed to evaluate your marketing mix. So very important is to, and particularly as you're going through replanning, is to understand in real time how well your marketing mix is performing. So you can think of all the marketing programs that you're running as a portfolio, kind of like an investment portfolio. And so when you are looking at this portfolio of campaigns, maybe it's 10 campaigns or maybe it's 50 campaigns. Some campaigns are perpetual campaigns like your demo download, or some may be point in time type campaigns like a particular, like this webinar is kind of a point in time campaign. And then we'll turn it into a perpetual campaign. But so there's a lot of variation in the types of campaigns you're running. And so it's really important to understand what the impact of those campaigns are on pipeline and revenue, because after all, that's the most important thing. So you're trying to evaluate what are the key areas that are you're making investments in, which campaigns, which tactics, which groups of tactics are actually driving the most revenue and which are driving the least. Because once you understand that, then you can be, kind of cold-hearted about it and say like, oh, that wasn't very good. We can take the money that we spent on that campaign and put it into one that's performing well. And that's how you optimize. Okay, so all of our best customers do something like this. First, they align their sales and marketing teams on company objectives, and then they adopt funnel metrics and attribution, and then they host regular meetings. I can't emphasize the regular meetings things enough, because this is where the real value of measuring marketing comes from. So getting sales ops and marketing ops and digital marketing people, like all in the same room, is really important. And our best customers do this every week. They have a weekly meeting that they hold, and then every month they actually have a meeting with the execs to report on exactly what they're finding. But in these regular meetings, they identify areas of improvement, and then they make adjustments and take action items and figure out where they need to change. And then it kind of starts all over again. So what happens is, on average, what we're seeing is that when our customers are taking these steps, they get about 30% more efficient in a lot of areas. Now, the 30% more efficient doesn't happen year after year. It's kind of an initial cut, because you're actually uncovering and seeing the performance of every campaign, and then you can make a rational judgment as to where the investment should go. Okay, so sorry about this. I had to do the advertising part here, but Full Circle has a suite of applications, and it starts with measuring at the top of the funnel our digital source tracker products. It continues with funnel metrics, so you can measure your sales and marketing funnel effectively, doing volume, velocity, and conversion rates. And then our third product, of course, is our attribution product, which is a very flexible multi-touch attribution product. And then lastly, if you're doing some ABM and you need to match leads to accounts inside Salesforce, you can use Matchmaker. And Matchmaker, if you're doing an ABM approach, that works across the attribution and funnel metrics products, as well as digital source tracker. So all these applications all work together depending on kind of what your strategy is for your marketing. So I am going to talk a little bit more about digital source tracker, because we have now extended our full circle method to digital marketing. So our full circle method for digital marketing also has 4 dashboards. It's funny how it all comes in 4s for us. But the first one is, it focuses on engagement. And that dashboard provides information about how well the prospects are engaging in digital campaigns. Second dashboard is cost, and that answers the question, how much is the digital marketing costing us? The third dashboard is effectiveness, and with that dashboard, we're trying to understand what the effect and impact is of the digital marketing on pipeline. And then lastly is revenue. So what's the impact of digital marketing on revenue? And so this is an exciting area for us to dive into. I want to now talk a little bit about answering questions that you might have. So in this particular part of the presentation, I'm taking some of the questions that are often asked about our marketing. And these are very tactical type questions. They're not the high level ones like, is our marketing working? These are more specific. So I want to take you through a couple of charts that we've put together to answer these questions, and show you how we actually can apply the full circle method to answering some of these questions. So the first one is, has our pipeline velocity increased? Are our overall sales cycles shorter? So this particular chart shows on the x-axis, this is time, right? So by quarter, you can see the quarters. It's very small. So Q4 19, Q1 2020, and then ends with Q2. Okay, so on this chart, you can see on the y-axis, this is velocity in days. So you can see that's 110 days, and then down below it would be 0 days. And so this bottom line shows the velocity of MQL to demo. And the optimal number of days for actually getting a demo schedule from a marketing qualified lead is 0. And so you can see here that this company had a conversion rate of around 5, and then it went up to more than 10. But now in Q4 got its act together, and now it's hovering around 0, which is really which is the optimal number. So that means that the SDR is actually doing a really good job in follow-up. This line here shows the MQL to 1 velocity and how many days it takes for an MQL to turn into a deal. So back here in Q1 of 2019, a really long time. And that's of course improved over time. So this kind of chart, if the lines were going, if the lines were going up and to the right, that means that there's some problems, and it's a good opportunity to take a look at what's going on with the overall sales cycles and marketing mix, and kind of investigate why that might be happening. Okay, so now I want to turn to another question, which is, did this tactic get a reaction? So here is an ad, top 5 reports your CEO wants from marketing right now. And it's a display ad. And so let's just see how this display ad is, how engaging this display ad is for prospects. And so here's a chart which says top 10 digital advertising campaigns by page views, and you can see that that the number of clicks here is really high, right? So much higher than any of the other campaigns. And you can also see that you can also see here the number of page views. So what I want to show here is kind of what happens after that. So one of the metrics here we have is a page view to click ratio. So if you have a page view to click ratio of 2 or 3, that means that 2 or 3 pages were viewed on your website for every click. So you can see here that this FC brand search campaign has some pretty healthy page view to click ratio. So that means that the engagement is pretty high. But you can see here that this display ad it's relatively low. It's at 1. So what does that mean? That means that this ad, although a lot of people clicked on it, it wasn't very engaging. This whole campaign, probably needs a bit of work. Let's also look to see if any revenue has been generated from this. So only the FC brand campaign actually has generated revenue from that set of digital marketing. So that also says something. Or it might be the fact that the campaign has been only run for a very short time. So in summary, for that display ad that we talked about, there were loads of clicks, right? But it was a very low page view to click ratio. There was no revenue generated. I think that we need to adjust that advertisement. Okay, the last question I want to address is to address a question around, is more revenue being produced in a particular segment? Now, what you can see here is a chart, and notice that the chart looks a little different than the other charts that I showed. This is Salesforce Classic. Some of you may be familiar with Salesforce Classic versus Lightning. This is a chart straight out of Salesforce Classic, and I confess that I'm, when it comes to report generation, I find that sometimes it's easier for me to go back to Classic to actually create a chart. I don't know if everybody's like me or not, but I find that that's easier sometimes. I'm trying hard to use the Lightning interface, but I still have some learning to do there. But anyway, this chart is focused on segmentation by industry. So you can see here, there's in the account object there, we've listed a series of industries, and you can see here that on the x-axis is the sum of the opportunity amount. So this is the amount. This is deal amount, and you can see that here that, say if you had a focus on, you're trying to do a strategic focus on healthcare, not much revenue is being produced for healthcare, but quite a lot for computer software. So if you had that strategic focus on healthcare and you were doing all the campaigns to try to drive healthcare, so far not so good, right? But you can also see in this particular chart, and you can probably create a chart that shows this a little bit better, but you can show by campaign type, and each of these colors represents a different campaign type. So and you can take a look at that. The reason I want to show this chart is that, and I want you to use your imagination here a little bit, is that you can create fields in Salesforce on the campaign that will address the approach that Ross was mentioning, which is the different asset types or the different delivery methods or the different themes. And by adding fields to the campaign, you can slice and dice this even further than what I've shown here. You can also not only take a look at this kind of information around revenue, not only by industry, but of course by role or by title. So you can get a sense of whether your campaigns are being targeted and engaged with by the right people. Okay. At this point, I want to just talk a little bit about what steps that you might think about taking if you're wanting to improve your marketing measurement. So first is really understand your objectives. So one of the things that in sort of the bad old days when things were less transparent is understanding what the actual sales objective is. By using the full circle method, it actually forces sales and marketing people to talk about what their real objectives are so that the marketing people know exactly what kind of revenue needs to be generated. It's not a secret. Then the second thing is to reassess your ideal customer profile. So as we're moving into kind of this recessionary period, your ideal customer profile might shift. There may be certain segments that actually work better for you. So reassessing your ideal customer profile right at this time is a really important thing. Then, of course, setting up systems that automatically measure your marketing campaigns and the results. Fourth is to hold regular meetings. I can't emphasize this enough. The people that do the best with marketing measurement, they have regular meetings, they are transparent about the data across department, and they work on trying to just get better. And in those meetings, they take action items and they find issues and they resolve them. It creates a really healthy dialogue across sales and marketing, and even within marketing, digital marketing and the marketing ops people. It's a very healthy dialogue and actually works really well. And then the last thing is, as you're assessing what's working and what's not working, it's really great to review your new priorities with the executives. Executives love it when you know exactly what's going on with your marketing. They love it when you know what's working and what's not working. And they love it when you present, okay, we found that this was working great. We want to make more investments here and less investments there. That's really well appreciated by executives. If you're a CMO and a leader of a marketing team, hiring talent or training for marketing measurement, very important. You can't do it if you don't have the right people in place. And marketing is a really complex discipline. So there's so many, and actually I really like it because it's creative and it's also numeric. There's the left brain, right brain. There's all these different jobs in marketing. And it's a very exciting and interesting area. But hiring the right talent or training for marketing measurement is really important. Purchasing systems that are accurate on funnel metrics and attribution. Can't emphasize that enough. Just measuring marketing with top of the funnel metrics doesn't cut it anymore. CEOs really want to know how well the marketing is impacting sales. And then if you want to have good results, you got to insist that there's regular cadences with the meetings, and really assign that to someone to hold the meetings and report on a regular basis. Okay, my fourth bullet: don't waste marketing spend unnecessarily. I mean, duh. Everybody knows that. We want to optimize the money that we have, and particularly in this kind of economy. So when revenues and sales are growing great, oftentimes there's many more experiments that you can run that might not work. And so in these times, you're really going to want to optimize the spend and be as efficient as possible with every dollar. And then showing the CEO, you really understand how every dollar is spent. The CEOs love that, so does the CFO. And working with sales is a lot easier when you really understand the impact of all the activities in the marketing department. Marketing is a lot of fun. It's creative and also an opportunity to show impact on business. So that concludes my remarks. I want to turn this back to Katie to help us with some Q&A. I don't know if any questions based on.
Thank you. Thanks, Bonnie and Ross. That was amazing. So yeah, next we're going to turn it over to questions. So if you have any other questions, please type them in the question box or the chat box. Looks like we did get a few questions, but before we do so, I just want to remind everyone that this webinar was recorded, so we will be sending that out to you within the next few days. All right, so the first question we have here is, what are the characteristics of companies that have been successful with tactic effectiveness?
I can take that one. So in my experience working with clients, there are a couple of things that I see being really critical to getting a great evaluation for how your tactics are doing. And the first thing is the organizations who do best here are the organizations that have and spend the most discipline on coming up with the right planning approach, meaning organizations who plan better are better positioned to understand how their tactics did for them. It is a much more straightforward activity to go and say, we know these tactics were for developers, and we know that we're concentrating on the acceleration of opportunities that are led by developers, and then look at how tactics did relative to those objectives, than it is to start saying, you know what, we're not really sure what these tactics were up against, but we're going to start hunting and pecking and figuring out if we can find someplace where these tactics have done well for us. Everything becomes much better, much easier to assess if we know what we're assessing it against. And the other thing that comes to mind here, and it's something that Bonnie pointed out a couple of times in her section, the organizations that I see doing this best are the ones who are religious about their reporting cadence. Meaning, not only do they have the right series of review meetings set up, the intra-marketing meetings, as well as those cross-functional meetings inclusive of counterparts in sales, but the organizations who ensure that those meetings are happening as scheduled and take to a regular cadence, because that gives them the opportunity to consistently review how things are going and make adjustments. So that's what I see among organizations who are most effective at managing this.
Great. All right. Looks like our next question here is, how do we get started with measuring tactic effectiveness?
So I'll jump in on this one. First, I think it's most important to make a commitment. Sometimes commitment is hard, but if you're going to actually do it, you want to jump in with both feet. So, and the commitment needs to be at a bunch of different levels. It needs to be at the executive level, it needs to be at the management level, and the individual contributor level. So, and it needs also, the commitment should be baked into company plans so that it shows up somewhere on some objective chart, so that people are being measured against actually executing the task. So that's number one, is commitment. Second is, the task needs to be assigned to someone. So someone as the owner. The third thing is, you're going to need some tech in order to actually do it. So whether it's Full Circle or something else, you need some tech to actually do this measurement. Fourth is, you want to have an approach or a method. We have our Full Circle method, but you might have something else. Ross presented a bunch of great ideas as well. So whatever it is, you just need a method. And then last is, it just kind of going back to the meetings. The meeting cadence is really is very essential to success. The most successful companies, as Ross says, have this regular meeting cadence, and a regular meeting cadence between individuals and then also with the executives. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. Thanks, Bonnie. Okay, we have a question here from a customer at Full Circle, it looks like. Love the product. Curious about the potential to include sales activities in the attribution model. This would then combine both marketing touches and sales touches. This might be for you, Bonnie.
Yeah, all right. That's a really good question. And I would love to talk to you, whoever this is, offline. It's kind of a philosophical thing. So first of all, we do track sales activities, and we track them in the Deal Explorer. So if you're a current Full Circle customer, click on the Deal Explorer for your on an opportunity, and you can see sales activities listed there. So that's number one. Second is, we are not sure that it actually makes sense to include sales activities in with marketing activities because of the volume of potential, outreach. I'll mention, outreach or sales lock. If you're using some of those tools, each one of those tools, whenever an email is generated, that counts as a sales activity. And so the question is, and it's a philosophical one, and I would love to engage in a conversation on this, is does it make sense to equate a sales activity with the same weight as a marketing response? Because the volume on the sales side could be super, super high. And then the question is, how do you actually do the weighting? So so far we don't have a good approach to that. Maybe I'll tee that up for Ross at Forrester Serious Decisions. He may have some answers to that one, or we all may just need to study the problem.
Yeah, so Bonnie, I'll take a stab here because I think there are a lot of really fascinating questions that are being raised by this, and I think the point that you made about equivalency between outreach and responsiveness is spot on. Now, in a perfect world, I know that most organizations would love to be able to categorize a set of sales interactions that were equivalent to that had equivalent weight or value to marketing interactions and start to at least look at the problem. But it's certainly not as simple as saying, you know what, we're just going to add everything up and divide it by how many and come up with the right answer. So the organizations that I see being very progressive about this, they're starting to wade through how to think about those sales interactions so they're not getting overwhelmed and overloaded by all the noise. But I'm not sure that a clear answer has really presented itself quite yet.
Thanks, Ross. I think we're in agreement.
Great. Okay, so it looks like we have time for just a few more. Are there certain questions we should ask ourselves to determine if a tactic is working or not?
I'll take a swing at this one. One of the things that I always go back to are the questions of who it's for and what it's for. Making sure that anytime I'm looking at an assessment of whether it's responsiveness or responsiveness in association with wins, that I know I know what I'm evaluating it against, meaning I want to be able to answer if it's working for a key audience and if it's accomplishing a key objective. Those are the things that I'm always going to have my eyes on the lookout for. Sometimes what we'll see, especially if there's a question about whether performance might be a little bit lower than we would have liked, I'll often see it becoming smart to start asking questions like, did we give this enough time that we're actually going to see the level of responsiveness that would be greater? So is it a timing problem? And then sometimes even after we've ruled out timing as an issue, I like to ask the question as to whether there are some better options to replace it. Because I know that sometimes as marketers, we're doing the tactics that we believe work as best as possible. And there may not always be other choice in terms of which tactics they are. So for example, I may have to turn to a whole lot of digital marketing or digital ad placements in a time, especially in a time like now, where the question then becomes more one of saying, well, I'm not going to change the delivery mechanism here, but let me start experimenting and understanding with what might happen if I change the asset type I'm offering, or perhaps change the themes. So there are often choices here, and it's just important to get our arms around what those choices are, because we're not looking for the perfect, we're not looking for the perfect tactic. We're just looking to make sure that everything we do is an improvement on what we did before.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Last question we have is, what tools do you recommend using to help me optimize my marketing results?
Oh, thanks, Katie. I'll take this one, of course. A couple years ago, I was chatting with a really smart marketing operations person, and he told me, you know, there's 3 tools that I need in order to succeed, in order to measure marketing well. I need when I go into a company, I need Salesforce, I need a really good marketing automation system, and I need Full Circle. And if I have those 3 things, and there's probably there'll be other tools that are being used inside a company, but if I have those 3 things, I can do a great job at measuring my marketing. So I'll just end it right there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you, Ross and Bonnie, for a great presentation, and everyone who joined us. We appreciate it. And look out for an email from us with the recording. And I hope you all have a great Thursday.
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.